There comes a moment when pain no longer asks for your tears, it demands your truth. When every excuse, every comforting lie, every ounce of self-deception collapses under the weight of what you can no longer avoid. That's the threshold where strength is forged, not in escape, but in confrontation. Because it's not the suffering that destroys you, it's the refusal to face what it's trying to teach. The collapse of the false narrative reveals the authentic self. For most people, life becomes a kind of performance. You develop a persona, a set of habits, reactions, even emotional postures that you use to navigate the world. It's not entirely dishonest at first. It's how you learn to survive. You learn what gets approval and what earns rejection. You learn how to avoid pain, how to deflect blame, how to keep people from seeing the parts of you that are broken or ashamed. Over time, that performance solidifies into an identity. It becomes the story you tell yourself about who you are, what you've been through, and why you act the way you do. And you believe it because, for a while, it works. It keeps you stable. It gives you something to stand on. But eventually, the cracks begin to show. The world has a way of testing the stories we build about ourselves. The lies you tell, even the ones told for self-protection, begin to unravel under the weight of reality. You find yourself repeating the same conflicts, facing the same failures, and somehow convincing yourself that it's always someone else's fault. You play the victim, or the martyr, or the misunderstood genius, depending on which role fits the moment. But deep down, a quiet awareness starts to whisper that something isn't right. You sense that the drama you keep replaying is not sustaining you anymore, it's exhausting you. And when that realization grows strong enough, it begins to dismantle everything false within you. That collapse is painful. It feels like death because, in a sense, it is. The false self, the version of you built on pretension, avoidance, and fear, has to die before anything real can take its place. When you stop believing your own excuses, when you see the cost of your own self-deception, you experience a kind of internal disintegration. The ground you used to stand on falls away. You feel exposed. You feel lost. And in that moment, it's tempting to run back to the performance, to rebuild the illusion and pretend nothing happened. But if you can withstand that discomfort, if you can sit in the emptiness long enough to see what remains, you begin to encounter something extraordinary. What remains is the unadorned self. The self that exists before the stories, before the identities, before the roles you learned to play. It's quiet, humble, and deeply uncomfortable at first, because it doesn't rely on manipulation or performance. It doesn't care about being liked or approved of. It just times is asterisk. And facing that raw authenticity is perhaps the hardest task a human being can undertake, because it strips away every mask and demands absolute honesty. You start to see how much of your life has been organized around avoidance, avoiding responsibility, avoiding pain, avoiding truth. You recognize that much of what you've called personality was really a defense mechanism. You see how often you've chosen chaos just to feel something, or adopted suffering as an identity because it made you special. The false narrative had protected you from reality, but it also prevented you from growing. It kept you small. It kept you blind. When that illusion finally breaks, what's revealed isn't just who you are, it's who you could become. You realize that beneath the lies and the fear is potential. The potential to act with integrity, to create order out of chaos, to take responsibility for your own suffering instead of distributing it to others. The collapse of the false narrative is not merely a loss, it's a transformation. It exposes the foundation upon which real character can be built. You begin to understand that authenticity isn't comfort, it's courage. It's the willingness to see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. And in that confrontation, something inside you starts to realign. You begin to sense the presence of a truth that is far more durable than the drama you once relied on. The false self crumbles, but what stands behind it is solid, unmovable, and real. Responsibility replaces victimhood as the path to meaning. When life becomes unbearable, it's easy to believe that you've been singled out by misfortune. You look at the chaos around you, the injustice, the disappointment, the betrayal, and you tell yourself that you've been wronged. Maybe you have. Maybe you truly were treated unfairly. But the danger lies in what happens next. Because if you allow that narrative to dominate, if you start to build your identity around being the one who suffers, you begin to trade power for pity. You lose the ability to act. You become a spectator in your own existence, waiting for the world to fix what only you can repair. Victimhood is seductive. It feels righteous. It gives you a reason for your pain, and sometimes it even earns you sympathy. But it quietly steals your agency. You start believing that life happens times to times you, not times through times you. And when you live that way long enough, you stop looking for solutions. You look for someone to blame. You trade effort for resentment. You convince yourself that meaning will appear once others acknowledge your suffering, when in truth, meaning only emerges when you decide to bear your suffering voluntarily. Responsibility is the antidote. It doesn't erase pain, it gives it purpose. To take responsibility means to look at the wreckage of your life and say, all right, maybe it wasn't all my fault, but it's my problem now. That simple admission shifts everything. It's not about guilt, it's about ownership. It's about saying that despite the chaos, despite the injustice, you will not wait passively for rescue. You will act. You will take what's broken and attempt to make it better. That's a terrifying decision because responsibility demands sacrifice. It requires you to let go of the comfort of being blameless. As long as you can point your finger outward, you can keep your hands clean. But once you take responsibility, you realize that everything you touch will bear your fingerprints. You become accountable not just for your failures, but for your potential. And that's an immense burden. Yet paradoxically, it's also where meaning begins to grow. Meaning is not found in freedom from responsibility, it's found in the weight of it. When you take on the responsibility of your own existence, you begin to see that your actions matter. The smallest honest effort becomes significant. The decision to tell the truth instead of lying, to listen instead of blame, to repair instead of destroy, those acts, however small, start to give your life coherence. You move from being a victim of circumstance to a participant in creation. You stop asking why me and start asking what can I do now? That shift doesn't make life easier. In fact, it often makes it harder. But it makes it worth living because responsibility transforms suffering into something meaningful. It turns pain into progress, chaos into order, and despair into direction. It's the moment you stop seeking validation for your wounds and begin building strength from them. It's when you cease being defined by what happened to you and start being defined by what you choose to do next. Growth begins where comfort and excuses end. Most people say they want to change, but what they really mean is that they want to feel better while staying the same. They want transformation without discomfort, progress without sacrifice, evolution without effort. But that's not how growth works. Growth demands the dismantling of what's familiar. It demands that you confront your own complacency, the quiet, seductive voice that says, you've done enough, you're fine where you are. Comfort is not peace. It's stagnation disguised as safety. It keeps you from seeing how much more you could become if you stopped hiding behind excuses. Excuses are the walls that protect the comfort zone. They sound reasonable, even intelligent. It's not the right time. I don't have the resources. I'm just not that kind of person. They offer you a way out, a way to avoid failure without admitting fear. But every time you make an excuse, you trade a piece of your potential for temporary relief. You convince yourself that the obstacle is external when, most of the time, it's internal. It's not that the world is stopping you, it's that you've built a narrative that justifies not moving forward. And as long as that narrative stays intact, nothing changes. Real growth begins the moment you stop negotiating with your excuses. It begins the moment you say, I'm responsible for where I am, and I'm capable of changing it. That realization is uncomfortable because it destroys the illusion that life owes you something. It forces you to see how often you've chosen the easy path over the meaningful one. It shows you how much of your suffering is self-inflicted, born not of circumstance, but of avoidance. Growth asks you to look at the truth of your situation without resentment and without self-pity. And that level of honesty feels like a kind of exposure, like standing naked in front of reality with nothing to hide behind. That's why so few people truly grow, because it's not just about doing more, it's about dying to who you were. You have to give up the comfort of your old limitations, the predictability of your habits, the identity that's been built around what you cannot do. Growth always feels like loss before it feels like liberation. You outgrow friendships, environments, even versions of yourself that once felt essential, and that loss hurts. But without it, you remain trapped in repetition, recycling the same experiences, the same lessons, the same mistakes, pretending that time itself will somehow transform you. It won't. Time only deepens whatever you choose to maintain. If you choose comfort, time will make you weaker. If you choose responsibility and truth, time will make you stronger. Growth is not automatic, it's intentional. It happens when you willingly step into discomfort, when you choose effort over ease, and when you refuse to let fear dictate the limits of your life. Every act of genuine growth begins with a simple but radical decision: to stop lying to yourself about why you're not where you want to be. Once you do that, excuses lose their power, and the process of becoming begins. The end of drama marks the beginning of true agency. Drama thrives on emotional chaos. It gives the illusion of movement, of significance, but it's circular, it leads nowhere. People get addicted to it because it offers a constant stream of intensity. It feels alive. It feels meaningful. But it isn't. Drama is a distraction from the terrifying silence of accountability. It's easier to stay caught up in emotional storms than to face the quiet question that waits underneath. What am I actually doing with my life? As long as there's drama, you don't have to answer. You can stay preoccupied with the noise instead of confronting your own paralysis. When the drama ends, you lose that noise. There's no more crisis to fuel your attention, no more chaos to justify your inaction. It's like standing in a room that suddenly goes silent after years of shouting. At first, it's unbearable. You crave the noise again because it made you feel something: anger, excitement, urgency, anything that kept you from stillness. But once the chaos stops, you start to see how much of it was self-created. You realize that you've been manufacturing problems to avoid responsibility. You've been mistaking turmoil for purpose. And when you see that clearly, something fundamental shifts inside you. True agency begins in that silence. It begins when you stop reacting and start choosing. Without the emotional chaos to hide behind, you're forced to confront the fact that your life is shaped by your decisions or your lack of them. Agency isn't about control over others or circumstances. It's about mastery over yourself. It's the recognition that while you can't dictate every outcome, you can always decide how to respond. That's the foundation of personal power. But you can't access that power while you're addicted to drama, because drama keeps you reactive. It makes you a puppet pulled by emotional strings, not a person who acts with intention. The end of drama is a kind of awakening. It strips away the illusion that life's chaos is external. You start to notice how often you've invited it in, how often you've engaged in conflict just to feel seen, or exaggerated pain just to feel significant. When you stop doing that, the world doesn't suddenly become easier. In fact, it becomes heavier, because you can no longer hide from the truth that your choices matter. Every word, every action, every silence, they all contribute to the direction of your life. You begin to feel the weight of that awareness, and it's not comfortable, but it's real. Agency is the quiet discipline of choosing clarity over chaos. It's saying, I will not let my emotions rule me. I will not create crises just to avoid responsibility. It's learning to sit in stillness long enough to act from principle instead of impulse. That's where genuine strength is forged, not in the drama, but in the discipline that follows its end. When the noise stops, you finally have the space to act with purpose instead of reacting out of fear. You move from being tossed around by life to steering it, one deliberate choice at a time. Truth transforms suffering into strength. Suffering is unavoidable. It's woven into the structure of existence itself. You lose people, you fail, you're betrayed, you make mistakes that haunt you, and sometimes the world simply crushes you for no apparent reason. There's no escaping that. But what determines whether that suffering destroys you or refines you is your relationship to truth. When you turn away from truth, pain becomes chaos. It fragments you. It fills your life with resentment and bitterness. But when you turn toward truth, even the most unbearable suffering can become the ground on which you build something sacred. The instinct to avoid truth in the face of suffering is understandable. When reality hurts, denial feels merciful. You tell yourself stories to dull the pain. You minimize your failures, blame others, pretend you're fine, and for a while it works. You can float in that illusion, shielded from the sharp edges of life. But the longer you live in untruth, the more disconnected you become. You start to lose yourself. Lies create fragmentation. They pull you in different directions, force you to maintain appearances, drain your energy. Suffering without truth becomes suffering without meaning, and that's the kind of pain that corrodes the soul. Truth doesn't remove pain, it reshapes it. When you face what is real, even when it's excruciating, you begin to see suffering differently. It's no longer a punishment, it's a process. It's the fire that burns away what's unnecessary. Truth exposes the weaknesses you've been hiding, the habits that keep you stuck, the ways in which you've betrayed your own potential. That exposure is humiliating, but it's also liberating. Because when you finally stop lying to yourself, you stop being a victim of your pain. You start to participate in it consciously, allowing it to teach you what comfort never could. Every person who's ever built real strength has walked through that fire. They've faced the consequences of their actions, admitted what they feared to see, and refused to look away. And in doing so, they discovered that truth, no matter how painful, is never an enemy. It's the path back to integrity. It's what aligns your thoughts, your words, and your actions so that you can bear the weight of existence without collapsing under it. The more truth you can tolerate, the stronger you become. Because strength isn't about avoiding pain, it's about carrying it with clarity. Suffering that's met with lies multiplies. Suffering that's met with truth transforms. When you tell the truth, you organize chaos. You take what's unbearable and give it form. You begin to see that the pain itself contains instruction. It's revealing who you could be if you stop resisting reality. That's why truth is redemptive.